Mr. Quiet by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Quiet liked a quiet life. He lived quietly in a small little cottage in the middle of a wood. The problem was that small little cottage was in the middle of a town in the middle of the country called Loudland. Everything and everybody in Loudland was noisy. Oh, the noise. Dogs didn't go woof like dogs, you know. They went, take a deep breath, woof. People didn't shut their doors like you and I would shut our doors. They slammed them. Bang. People didn't talk to each other. They shouted at each other. Hello. They shout as they met at the street. Now, if you've ever about something being as quiet as a mouse, haven't you? Not in Loudland. They've had the noisiest mice in the world. Squeak, squeak. They'd roar at each other. Mr. Noisy would have liked living in Loudland. He'd have loved it. But Mr. Quiet didn't. Noise frightened him. So he stayed in his cottage in the middle of his wood as much as he could. But of course, he couldn't stay there all day. Every week, for instance, he had to go shopping. What? Mr. Noisy went shopping. In this book, egads. He used to creep in the grocery shop. Good morning, Bella the grocer. What can I do for you? Please, whispered Quiet. Whisper, Mr. Quiet. Could I have some cornflakes, please? What? Cornflakes, please. He whispered. Speak on, ye gods. Mr. Quiet tried his loudest whisper. Cornflakes. Can't hear you, shouted the grocer. Next, please. And poor Mr. Quiet had to creep away without any cornflakes. It wasn't fair, was it? He crept into the butcher's shop. Please, he whispered. I'd like some meat. The butcher didn't even hear him. He was humming to himself loudly and fiercely. Mr. Quiet tried again. Please, he whispered. I like some meat. The butcher started to whistle. It sounded like a burglar alarm at a whistle. Mr. Quiet fled, empty-handed. It often so happened, which probably explains why he was so little for Mr. Quiet. He sat at home at night with a feeling of despair. Whatever am I to do? He thought. It's no use. He thought, I'll just have to try again. And so, the following day, he went shopping again. But the same thing happened. Can't hear you, thundered the grocer. Next, please. Can't hear you, bellowed the green grocer. Next, please. Can't hear you, roared the milkman. Next, please. Can't hear you, boomed the butcher. Mr. Bacon. Next, please. Oh dear. Poor Mr. Quiet went home and went to bed, hungry. The morning after he was awakened by a noise which sounded like bombs dropping. It was the Loudland person knocking at Mr. Quiet's door. Bang, 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 bang. Mr. Quiet went and opened the door. Morning, shouted the postman. Letter for you. Mr. Quiet took the letter to his kitchen. He sat down to open it. He waited until the noise of the postman's footsteps have died away. Clop, 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 clop. Ah, God! Mr. Noisy does that sound effect. Mr. Quiet opened the letter in great excitement. He never had a letter before. It is from Mr. Happy in Happyland. An invitation to stay. Mr. Quiet was overjoyed. He rushed upstairs and packed his bag and set off every morning. It was late when he arrived at Mr. Happy's doorstep. He tapped on Mr. Happy's door. Tap, tap, tap. Mr. Happy opened the door. Hello, he smiled. I thought I heard something. You must be Mr. Quiet. Well, don't just stand there and come in and have some supper. is the first proper meal Mr. Quiet had had for months. While he was eating it, he told Mr. Happy about the problems he'd been having in Ludland. Mr. Happy was most sympathetic. Like in 2008, he is accident prone. But in this book, he wasn't. Over breakfast the following morning, Mr. Happy told Mr. Quiet that he had been thinking about his problem. I think, he said, that all the circumstances you better stay here in Happyland. Mr. Quiet's face lit up. And, continued Mr. Happy, we'll find you a house, and he went on a job. Mr. Quiet's face dropped. I'm not very good at jobs, he confessed, because I'm too quiet. Ah, smiled Mr. Happy. I have the right job for a quiet chap like you. It's the next day. Mr. Quiet started work, and he loves it. Do you know where he works? In the Happy Lending Library. As you know, everybody who goes to a library has to be quiet. Only whispering is allowed. What a clever idea. Mr. Happy's, wasn't it? And these days, Mr. Quiet is as happy as can be. Why, the other day, do you know what he did on his way home from work? He was so happy he laughed out loud. Can you imagine? Next, please. Okay, this is not attack. It's some Mr. Quiet thing. It's like the opposite of loud and quiet. Mr. Noisy and Mr. Quiet. That is like the library, where they go to the library and they often make Mr. nervous. And they have to call security. And oh boy, that Bummerfood pissed cat. Why is Mr. Quiet the opposite from Mr. Noisy? Because I think he's loud. And I think Mr. Quiet is quiet. Technically. In the 2008, he's baby blue. And technically, he must be accident prone. And actually, he's talking about egads. And I think Summer Wheeze is not actually terrible. Well, actually, Puppet 1 is dad. And actually, I think it's some egads. I'd like a piece of that. This isn't water, it's gas. Yeah, oh man. Oh man. Mr. Quiet must have had a quiet voice. Experiencing technical difficulties. We're experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. Only an nincompoop would positively just do that. You